TalkShoe. Recorded live.
Good evening, everyone. This is Mark Giuliano, and welcome to the second episode of Podcasters on Podcasting. This is, of course, a podcast, and it's talking to our podcasters. So I'm certainly using that word a lot, but the idea of this show is to interview successful podcasters, get a little bit about their secrets, some advice they have for people, and also just get to know them a bit better. Tonight we have a guest with us who is Cliff Ravenscraft, and Cliff's been doing podcasting for quite a while, and he'll tell us about that. Cliff has been so far the most successful podcaster on the TalkShoe network, and I just checked out the stats, and last week he had in the neighborhood of 8,500 downloads in a single week, according to our stats, and ours are indeed pretty conservative. So it's been quite successful, and not just with one show, but with a number of shows. So the first thing, actually, Cliff, I want to ask you is a bit about your background. Could you just give us an idea of kind of where you're from and how you kind of got here?
Sure. First of all, I am from northern Kentucky, which is just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm a husband. I've been married going now on 11 years to my wonderful wife, Stephanie Ravenscraft. Together, we parent 3 wonderful children. We are raising great adults in our time together as a family. And my daughter is 7 years old, my son is 5 years old, and our daughter, McKenna, is 22 months old. I've been an insurance agent for the past 10 years of my life and enjoy selling auto, home, life, and health insurance. And I'm also very much involved in ministry. In fact, for the past 6 years, I've been holding positions such as associate pastor and pastor of small groups in a church that is currently the size of about 7,000 people in attendance on a weekly basis. Recently, however, I've resigned from position as pastor so that I could do my ministry full-time through podcasting as well. And so my passions include my family, my faith, computers and technology, among other things.
But you sound certainly like a pretty busy guy. I think the 3 kids alone is enough. I've got 4 myself, so I know what that's like, especially on the ages you're talking about. So I'm sure it's pretty tough for you to squeeze in podcasting. But, tell us about that. I mean, how did you get into podcasting? It's obviously a relatively new thing. What got you intrigued about it?
Well, it's all due to Leo Laporte and his This Week in Tech podcast. I was a huge fan of Leo back in the ZDTV and Tech TV days, which was a cable/satellite network station that was all technology 24/7. And, of course, one of my passions being technology, I always watched that show. I was doing a search on the web, checking out to see what Leo was doing after the network had shut down, and found out that he was doing this thing called a podcast. And I had briefly heard them mention it on Tech TV once and really didn't seem too interested in it. And then I actually subscribed to his This Week in Tech, and I was so surprised. All the people that I grow to love on the Tech TV network were there in This Week in Tech. And so I got addicted to that show and very quickly learned about what podcasting was. I loved the fact that I could listen to it while I was riding my bike, walking through the neighborhood. I could listen to it when I wanted, where I wanted, however I wanted. And it didn't take me too long to find out that there were other podcasts out there other than just Leo. And I came across the podcast that was devoted to the best show on earth, which is called Lost. And I came home and I showed my wife. I was like so excited. You got to listen to this podcast called The Transmission. It's devoted to Lost. And she's like, no way. And so we listened to it on our couch, watching our computer screen together as we listened to the podcast, our very first podcast together. And basically, that night I started to look into podcasting and said, I would love to start one of these things. And today, 13 months later, I'm running 7 podcasts.
Now, did you have any previous, kind of broadcasting or radio or video or anything like that experience?
Absolutely no experience in broadcast at all. However, I have quite a bit of experience in talking a lot. and about being and I have a lot of experience being passionate about the things that I talk about, and it doesn't hurt that I've been preaching for 6 years as well.
Right. So I think you mentioned certainly two of the key things for successful podcasters. One is being liking to talk and having an audience, whether they're physically in front of you or over the internet, is pretty similar. And you also mentioned a key word that many of our podcasters mention, which is the word passion. And I think that's important. If you have something that you're passionate about, you're generally excited about what you're talking about, and it comes across on a podcast. Now, you just mentioned, you said you have 7 podcasts, so you really have a podcast network. In fact, Cliff's network is called Generally Speaking, and that's at www.generallyspeakingpodcast.com, I believe. And so now you got a whole network. I mean, this is way beyond just, hey, I want to talk about, the show Lost or hang out with Leo. This is sounds like a business you're kind of going after here. Tell us a bit about the network.
Absolutely. It's called the Generally Speaking Podcast Network, and you're absolutely right. You can find all of our shows at generallyspeakingpodcast.com. And I'm extremely passionate about the things that I podcast about. And, a couple of the secrets to doing, I think, successful podcasts is the fact that, again, we've already talked about the fact that you need to be extremely passionate about whatever you're talking about. Because I'll be honest with you, there is this one lady that was, listen to me as past tense as if she's passed or something. Dina Henry Scott has been a longtime listener of the Generally Speaking Podcast Network. And she was a listener and just would email in to me every now and then and ask me questions about podcasting. I'd email her back. And she decided to hire me as her podcast consultant. She figured she could learn how to do it all on her own, but figured it would take about 2 or 3 weeks to get everything going. And she figured since I had already gone through all that hard work, maybe I could just spend a couple hours with her and teach her how to do it. Well, she started a podcast devoted to project management. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had heard the term before, but never really cared too much about it before I met her. And to this day, I really am not overly enthused with project management, but every now and then I will download and listen to her most recent episode. 2 reasons. Number one, I have a personal connection in some small way, just even through a couple voicemails that she's left, a couple emails exchanged, and so there's a little personal connection there. But at the same time, she's extremely passionate about project management, which means that it's somewhat interesting to hear her talk about it because you're always drawn to people with passion. And so that's one of the secrets to success, I think, that's out there. The other couple things that I've learned is that you want to do podcasts for specific topics. I looked in the podcast directories and I realized that general podcasts don't cut it. They don't make the mark or make the grade. They don't get the subscribers because it's too general. Somebody wants to subscribe to a show that particularly talks about something they're interested in, and they don't want to see 13 episodes that same week or that same month that have nothing that interests them whatsoever. They just want episodes that only interest them. And so while I started off with this Generally Speaking podcast, which was going to be about Lost, plus it was going to have episodes regarding faith and technology, and it was all going to be in one feed because I figured it'd be too much work for me to start all these other feeds. I figured, it'd be great, but I learned very quickly that once people heard us talk about Lost fans didn't want to hear us talking about faith. They didn't want to hear me talking about technology. At least 7,000 or 8,000 of them didn't. There was about 1,000 people that would be interested in hearing some of those other things, but the overwhelming majority wanted to hear us talk about Lost.
Okay, so it's interesting because you've given us a lot of excellent advice so far, and we'll continue to talk about that. And you said you were kind of new and didn't have any experience. Are you kind of would you consider yourself an audiophile? Do you have a lot of equipment, or what do you really use to do your podcasts?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what. I am not an audiophile. In fact, if you would have asked me 13 months ago what an XLR cable is, I would have never been able to answer that question. And to be honest with you, as if I'm not going to be honest with you unless I tell you that. That was kind of weird. I hate, as a podcaster, that's one of the biggest things I hate, when you start saying the same thing over and over again and you don't realize it until you listen to the episode later. But anyway, when I would look at a mixer, I would get cold, clammy feelings. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I started my first podcast with my laptop and a $15 headset microphone from Walmart. And boy, you can tell. So that's what I started out with in equipment. Today I have probably about $3,000 or $4,000 worth of equipment.
Wow, so
sitting
you've really gotten into
at my
this.
fingertips.
This is a little more than the hobby now.
I crossed over from hobby to moving towards a career in October of 2006.
Okay, so you talked about, so you mentioned the word career. Now you got all these podcasts, you got a pile of hits. Career sounds like it might have something to do with money. So tell us about that. I mean, where do you see it going? I mean, is this something you're really going to do to make, I don't want to say a living, but to make a good amount of income? And tell us about that. Your kind of thinking about monetizing your podcasts.
Sure. Well, first off, I don't think that I'll ever make a living from podcasting. There's a lot of people out there that say, listen, you'll never be able to really effectively charge people for something they can get for free somewhere else. And I would always come back and argue, well, you can't get Cliff's perspective on things anywhere else other than from Cliff. But the thing is even I'm not so egotistical to think that people will pay money to hear me talk to them for hours and hours per week. So what I try to do with my podcasts is to cover operating expenses. One of the things that I have is we have the GSPN monthly support team. And those are people who come to my website at generallyspeakingpodcast.com. They go down to the PayPal button, and then it pulls up a page on my site where they can decide to contribute as little as $3 per month automatically as recurring payments through PayPal. And it's very easy for them to set that up, and they can cancel it at any time. But I have several people signed up who will do that, and what that does is it helps me cover bandwidth charges. I've got a special broadband voicemail service that delivers my voicemails to me in WAV files. I have costs associated with long distance telephone calls and all kinds of other just operating costs. And what I hope is that my podcast, the 7 shows that I do, that it will generate at least enough support to pay for the minimum operating costs of doing the podcasting. However, I did say career, and I do mean making a living in podcasting. But for me, that living, that actual over and above just the simple operating cost to keep things going, has to come from 2 other areas. One would be through monetization of putting some commercials at the front of the show, and that's something that TalkShoe is helping me to do, and I've been very appreciative of that. And what you guys do are you basically get some advertisers for me, and whatever you guys make in revenue from those advertisements, you share half of it with me. And it's enabled me to at least buy some nice equipment. Now, even with monetization of shows, I still don't see myself making a living off that, replacing my income as an insurance agent plus getting health benefits and all those things. So for me personally, I'm going into a career not only as a podcaster, but a podcast consulting, because where I see the future of podcasting is not just user-generated content from the individual, which I do see that growing, but I see businesses finally dumping their antiquated paper newsletters that you and I, Mark, every single time we open up the mailbox, we dump them right into the trash can. We don't read those newsletters. We don't read books anymore as a culture. So why do we continue as a business, as an insurance agency, to send out newsletters to our clients when it's just going in the trash? Yeah. Where for a fraction of the cost, I mean literally a fraction of the cost of postage, you can hire a podcast consultant to help you learn how to relate personally, and instead of coming with a commercial, because nobody's going to subscribe to your commercials for your business, they want to hear you talk to them personally, one-on-one. And I'm going to teach people how to do that as an executive of a business, or I'm going to teach them how to reach people where they are so that they can have this community that gets built among their clients or prospects that will generate not only people who are connected to you through this relationship of podcasting, but people who become dedicated to you and your business because of what you contribute and what you are able to provide for them through this medium. And so podcast consulting is where I'm going.
Cliff brings up you bring up a really good point, and I've heard this from a number of other people in podcasting that, it's kind of this avenue of being a consultant, which makes a lot of sense. And I think those people who are listening who are podcasters, you may not think you're some sort of an expert in podcasting, but it turns out you are. Because if you've been doing it for 12 months or 15 months or however long, guess what? Those companies, they haven't been doing it for any months. So they want to, they don't want to just take a leap of faith and jump in and start spending money. They want to get somebody who knows what they're doing, and somebody who's been doing podcasting, learning the ropes, learning the equipment, learning how to monetize, learning how to talk, learning how to prepare. All the things one needs to make a successful podcast is information that you as a podcaster can definitely impart on the companies, and they're willing to pay for it. And as you see, so I certainly wish you luck there, and I know you'll be successful because you've been successful so far in what you're doing. One of the people here on line right now asked a question about kind of the voice, and I'm assuming that the question really is, do you have to have that sort of radio voice, or is it okay to just be a regular guy and just talk? What have you found there in terms of the ones you've listened to, and also just from your personal experience?
Sure. Well, as a minister, I have to always ask the question, what do you mean by successful? Make lots of money? Or do you mean by successful, meaning that you have a show where you actually are able to talk about something that you're passionate about, and you just want to be able to gather around you a very large community of people who will also support your passion? And because if that's what you mean by success, by all means, anybody can be successful. I know that there are 13, 14-year-old boys out there that are doing podcasting, not that just boys, but I'm sure 13-year-old girls are. But I happen to know a couple 13-year-old boys that are doing podcasting devoted to Macintosh. And you know what? They reach a huge audience of other young teen boys that are also into Macintosh, and they do a superb job. Now, I've listened to them, and it doesn't interest me in the slightest, but they have their audience, and their audience loves their show. And so I would say that he would be considered a success. Now, is he going to be able to monetize that and be a financial success? I would say that it probably will take a little bit more than just having a passion for a subject. I don't necessarily think you have to have the voice. You can compensate for the voice with great content. Content is your number one thing. And for me, I honestly believe that audio production, and by audio production, I mean spending hours before every single show that you do, spending hours preparing for your show, and then doing a top-notch job actually investing in equipment. For example, I have $700 worth of broadcast radio station microphones sitting in front of me. I've come a long way from the $15 headset mics, and it has made a difference. And I will tell you that my subscriptions have grown incrementally with the improvements that I've made to the equipment and the sound production of my show.
Good. So you mentioned quality, and we've been talking about success. Like I said, you've been the most successful on the TalkShoe network. I mean, you're getting a lot of hits. What is it? I mean, because there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, I wander around the network and I listen to stuff that gets 3 hits a week, and it sounds pretty good. The guys have something to say. But where do you attribute your success in terms of building your audience base? Where do you really think the elements are that made you get such a large audience base?
Okay, first off, I will attribute my audience base to Lost. There is nothing on television that has the hype and all-around worldwide impact and influence that Lost does. No other television in history, no other television show in history has ever been on every single continent, downloaded illegally by millions of residents in every single country. I mean, they hear about Lost, They want to hear about it. And not only will they go and download it off the internet illegally, but they want to hear other people who are talking about it. And so they'll go and download a podcast, and they're searching for podcasts devoted to Lost. When I started out with my Lost podcast, I was the 4th fan Lost podcast out there. And I went from my first show had 400 listeners, and within 6 weeks I had 4,000 listeners. And that had absolutely nothing to do with the production quality of my show or anything like that, because I was nervous, I was blundering, I didn't put a lot of preparation into the show at first, and our audio was horrible. But the content was in high demand. There was a very large audience of people who were hungry for anybody to talk about Lost as much as possible. And so that's where I got my audience from. And when it came to, I've started other podcasts, and I attribute the success of all of my other podcasts that I do due to the relationships and the community that I have actually established among my listeners through playing every single voicemail that I can possibly play in all of my podcasts. When they call in, I put it in the show. I answer every single email. I get at least 60 emails a week. I sometimes get as many as 300 or 400 emails a week. I reply to every one, and I've never given a one of those pat responses with it that you copy and paste. I type a response to everyone. I have a listener forum with over 1,300 of our listeners that are signed in on a daily or not, if not daily, at least a weekly basis, who are interacting with each other. So we actually literally have a GSPN family that's built around our shows. So when I announce a new show, I've got a built-in audience at this point. But I have to say, if you want an immediate success, there are 2 things that you can do. Find something that you're going to have a huge audience for built in. Lost was one of them. Grey's Anatomy was a no-brainer. There is actually only one Grey's Anatomy fan podcast, and it started last week. And in the first week, we have over 1,200 subscribers. And so, I knew it was going to be a major success as soon as we announced it. And so that's what I would suggest is if you really want to build an audience fast, go out and do one where you already know that there are millions of people who already enjoy that. Now, technology, the market is flooded. You don't have a chance to build a several thousand member audience in a technology podcast today. So find something more niche targeted. Unless you can get into a technology that maybe you get into somebody that is a old Commodore 64 hobbyist. You start a podcast like that, you may be surprised at how many thousand people would search that out. So that's where I would say go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the tech, 'cause like you say, there's tons of tech podcasts out there, and of course, like anything, everybody gravitates towards the top 10 shows, like Leo's show or something like that. And when it comes to top Lost podcasts, obviously you're way at the top of the list. I had a question for you. Now, when you started the Lost podcast, were you like in message boards about it, or were you blogging about it, or did you, in other words, did you already have a group that you were communicating with, or was this just totally, kind of from left field doing the podcast?
I will tell you, what I did with my Lost podcast is I basically called in and left voicemails for the 3 existing podcasts that were already out there, just leaving my own personal theories and thoughts on the show. And about 3 weeks into doing that, after listening to these Lost podcasts, I decided to start my own. And so when I started leaving my voicemails, I started saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to start a podcast about Lost, and I'm actually going to talk about it from a slightly Christian perspective. So I said, not only that, but my wife is going to join me, and so we're actually going to bring a married couple's perspective on Lost into the mix. And I left that in voicemails on the other 3 shows. All 3 other existing fan Lost podcasts played my message, and that's where my audience came from.
So where do you see your network going? Let's kind of move this to talk about the future for a couple of minutes here. Where, is it more shows? Is it more audience? Is it, where are you headed?
I as far as my network, I want to make sure that I don't get. First of all, at this point in time, I don't have any aspirations of growing outside of what we call a self-produced podcast network, meaning that I am the executive producer and have my hands involved in every single part of overseeing every single episode produced on my network. So, and Leo Laporte is exactly the same way. Now, he has some other shows where he's not a part of the panel discussion, but he's very much a self-produced podcast network. His hands are involved in every single one of his shows. I see myself probably not growing any larger than the Twit network. But the thing is that I always want to make sure that before I go start a new show, that I always remain consistent with the shows that I have. I mean, the one thing is I realize is that I can sit here and talk about thousands of downloads. And for me, that's not thousands of downloads. And again, this comes from my ministry perspective and also as an insurance agent. People don't like to be viewed as a number. And if you view downloads as a statistic only, you've already failed as a podcaster because people aren't going to feel your love. And so, and if you decide you're not going to respond to the emails, then you're missing out. I will tell you that probably 1 out of every 10 emails that I take the time to respond to, with maybe about 5 to 10 minutes of my time, 1 out of 10 of those people will become a GSPN monthly supporter. That just tells you how much you need to view these people not as a number, but as individuals. And I have a show right now called Net Junk. It's downloaded by about 130 people per week. And I will be honest with you, I'm tempted to cut that show sometimes. When I look, especially when I think about ad revenue, my Lost podcast and my Grey's Anatomy podcast are going to bring in some massive ad revenue. And I put every single bit of as much time and effort into Net Junk, which is a technology podcast that I do with my friend who's been a great personal best friend of mine and prayer partner for 10 years. And he and I get together and talk for an hour and a half every week on TalkShoe. 130 people. But I tell you, there's this temptation sometimes to think, well, man, I'm only getting 130 people over here, and I'm getting, thousands. I could cut this show and go start another really popular one. And I would tell you, once you start thinking like that as a podcaster, you may be successful with downloads, but you're gonna roll off those downloads as quickly as they come on, and eventually you'll get a bad name in the community. And I'll tell you what, 130 people who are willing to listen to Cliff talk about technology and gadgets, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it sometimes amazes me. I know on my podcast, I'll look at numbers, and like you say, you kind of get fascinated with the numbers, and then you stop and think, maybe driving home, there's actually people somewhere out there listening to what I have to say about a topic or what my audience base, when we do an interactive one, has to say. And it's kind of amazing, especially when you get these emails from somebody in Australia, or I got one yesterday from a guy in the Netherlands, or things like that. It's kind of amazing that there is somebody out there actually listening and reaching out to you, and you're reaching out to them, obviously.
Yes, and that's the key. Reach out to them.
So we talked about then your future. Where kind of if you can put your general podcaster hat on for a second. You talked about some of the future in terms of corporations getting into podcasting. Any other prognostications about where you see this stuff heading? Because we're certainly at the beginning of this wave. But where do you think this is all going to go in a few years here?
Well, about 9 years ago, I started this thing called a blog. And people, I would say, hey, I just started a blog, and people would say, bless you. And I'm like, what? And they said, what'd you say? And I said, a blog. And they're like, what's a blog? And I just remember having to explain to everybody what a blog was. Now today, I mean, the news talks about the blogs. I mean, it's the matter of fact, it's the blog. I mean, what red-blooded American has never heard the term blogosphere? I mean, if you haven't heard the term blogosphere, you are not breathing. because that word is out there. Now, I will tell you, I was blogging before they actually had a blog engine. I was hand coding HTML files, and so I was an early adopter. And I said to myself, and I said to other people, they said, "What in the world is this blog thing that you're doing?" And it's like I said, it's like an online diary. It's like a website. It's automatically updated. It's in sequential order. It keeps track of things. It's really a great way to communicate information, facts, and what's going on in your life, and keep people updated. It's a great way to communicate your thoughts on and share ideas, and people can interact and comment on it. And it's really great, and I think it's really going to catch on. And people are like, I don't know about that. And today, it's everywhere. And I'm finding the same exact thing. Even today, now podcast finally was the word of the year, and it got put in the dictionary. Today, I still get, I don't have an iPod, so I can't listen to your podcast.
Right.
And so, but the thing is, where do I see, in a general term, podcasting going? It's already on its way there. I foresee a day where there will be more podcasts than there are blogs. And I think I don't think that podcasting will ever replace blogs, but I believe that podcasting will be everyday language for people in about 4 years from now. And I don't think I definitely know for a fact it's not a fad. It is here to stay, and it's only going to increase as people start finding about this. I mean, I listen to the channel, the local news at 11, and they're saying, oh, if you missed any portion of this episode, it'll be podcasted on our website immediately following the news. So, I mean, go get our podcast. You've got Whirlpool saying, go check out our podcast. You've got TV shows saying, check out our podcast. Superman Returns. Brian's blog, or Brian's diaries, or whatever. The guy, Brian Singer, I guess, is the director. It was a huge deal. As he was making the movie, he was podcasting the status of how that movie's going. Mm-hmm. Movie theaters are actually putting podcast commentaries, just like when you get a DVD special box edition and it's got the director's commentary on it.
Right.
Well, some movie studios are already releasing podcast commentaries for you to listen to, so that you can go back to watch the movie and pay full price in the theater again, so that you can put your earbuds in and listen to it as you're watching the movie again. So podcasting is going to be everywhere in 4 to 5 years from now.
Well, great. Cliff, I really appreciate, all of your comments. And it just for those people out there who kind of joined perhaps a little later, I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the things that Cliff mentioned. He certainly talked about the idea that to do a podcast, you got to just know how to talk. You don't have to be a radio voice. You don't have to be somebody who necessarily has all the gear and everything, but wanting to talk and wanting to communicate are quite important, in particular if they're coupled with passion. And Cliff used that word many, many times, as I've heard other podcasters use that exact term. He also talked about things like reaching out to your audience and not just treating people as numbers, but responding to emails, giving out your email address, and really building a sense of community, as opposed to more like a one-way radio broadcast where you really have no idea who's at the other end. Also talked about the fact that to get started, you really don't need to buy all kinds of gear. It may be great in the future to increase the quality of your podcast, and certainly that may help in terms of your listener base. But you can indeed get started with a PC and a mic, or a telephone, or some pretty rudimentary gear, and then kind of work up to it as you go. He also talked about kind of the money-making aspects, and I like the fact that Cliff, you've kind of done a little bit of the donation thing. I think that works. I think people out there who appreciate something, it's kind of like passing the hat. I'm from New York City myself, and I remember when there was a good group of guys, singing in Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village. People put their dollar bills in because they appreciated the quality of the content. Then, of course, there's ad revenues, and ultimately, those of you who are podcasting, you don't know it yet, but you're experts, and getting into the consulting world and helping corporations or other podcasters out is another great thing to do. So, Cliff, I do want to thank you. And one of the things I try to do is keep my podcast relatively short, kind of in that 20 to 35-minute realm. That seems to be the optimal size. And I should say to people out there that this is going to be a series where we'll talk to podcasters. If you're interested in being on the show, please send me an email at Jules, Jules, at TalkShoe.com. Even if you don't want to be a guest, just send me an email and we can chat and build an audience. The other thing that I will say is for all of the people on the show, I will actually be writing profiles. So these will be documents that we'll put up on the TalkShoe website in various places. You can download them, share them with your friends. Maybe they'll get published on blogs. So we'll start to spread the word of podcasters on podcasting and getting some of the stories out there, not only orally but also in the written word. So with that, I'm going to turn it to you one last time, Cliff, and ask you if you have any other final kind of closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience today.
Well, knowing that this is a TalkShoe audience, I only want to plug one show, and I want to invite the listeners to go to generallyspeakingpodcast.com, and in the right-hand side, you'll see all 7 of our shows. Halfway down, you'll see a show called The Podcast Answer Man, and I really want to plug 2 shows that I think anybody who is thinking about TalkShoe or is using TalkShoe should really pay close attention to. Episode number 4 of The Podcast Answer Man is titled Get Paid the Podcast, Really, from your very first show. So episode number 4 talks about how you can actually get paid the podcast, and it doesn't cost you anything. And then episode number 5 is my favorite podcast episode I've done in a very long time, and I interviewed the CEO of TalkShoe, Dave Nelson, and I got a backstage inside story on how TalkShoe came in to fruition, how it was just a thought a couple years ago, and how it got started, how the money was raised to do it, and where TalkShoe is going from this point forward. And that's episode number 5 of the Podcast Answer Man, Dave Nelson of TalkShoe. Thank you very much for letting me share that.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And Cliff, certainly if you know anybody else who you think would be a good guest, shoot me an email and try to keep this thing going. I certainly intend this to be going for quite a while. I'll never run out of guests because there's going to be an infinite number of podcasters going forward. And obviously this is for other people who want to get into the trade and the fun, really, of podcasting. So I'm going to go ahead and end the show, but those of you who want to stay on and talk, feel free to dial in. Feel free to chat. I'll leave the room open, and until next time, this is Jules signing off.